Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's ISO Board of Governors General Session. Please note that all audience audio connections will be muted to minimize background noise. To ask a question or make a comment verbally, click the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen to place yourself in the queue. When it's your turn to speak, simply click the unmute button in the pop-up message that will appear on your screen. If you are connected to today's meeting via regular phone audio, please click #2 to enter the comment queue. Please remember to state your name and affiliation prior to your comments. With that, I will turn the meeting over to ISO Board of Governors Chair, Mary Leslie. Mary, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And for all of you joining us, you are at the May 18, 2023 ISO Board of Governors General Session meeting. We have a very big agenda today. One could say an historic agenda. We will be approving the 2022-23 transmission plan, one of the largest, I believe, in maybe ever. We will also be discussing the interconnection process enhancements and getting what we hope is good news about summer loads and resource assessment. I'm also honored to welcome our newest member to the Board of Governors, Joe Eto. He's joining us as a veteran of the Berkeley Labs. He is an expert in transmission and interconnection and many other issues, and is going to be an amazing addition to the ISO board. And we thank him for joining us. At this point, I'd like to call for public comment.
And let me interrupt you. Sorry, Mary. Let's do roll to officially kick us off. Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let me go ahead and take the roll, and then we can officially, for the record, have our quorum present. Chair Leslie?
Present.
Vice Chair Shorey?
Here.
Governor Borenstein?
Here.
Governor Eto?
Here.
And Governor Galitova?
Here.
Thank you, governors. We have a quorum, full complement, and we may proceed.
Thank you, Roger. Now we are open for public comment. I believe these are comments that don't relate to anything currently on the agenda.
Michelle, can you check the line for public comments, please?
All right. I do not currently see any hands raised. Once again, pressing the raise hand icon will enter you into the comment queue, and #2 if you're joined via audio, regular audio. I do not see any raised hands.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no public comment, then we will introduce the first item, Roger, the decision on the March 23rd general session minutes.
Thank you, Chair Leslie. And as you noted, if I can have a motion for approval of the March 23rd, 2023 ISO Board General Session minutes.
So moved, Jan.
I'll second.
Thank you, Angelina. Thank you, Jan. Let me go ahead and take the vote. Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Governor Eto.
Abstain.
Governor Galitova.
Aye.
Governor Leslie.
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes. Back to you, Mary.
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce our CEO for his report, Elliot Maines.
Thank you, Chair Leslie and governors. It's wonderful to see all of you this afternoon. And once again, to Governor Eto, welcome, and hope your first week with us here as board meetings has gone as well as expected. And thanks again, and great to have you on board. As Chair Leslie mentioned, this has been, I think, a very consequential week and a lot on the agenda today. I wanted to offer some perspectives on a number of the topics on the agenda today, and just more broadly, the major activities at play at the ISO, starting with summer readiness, which we'll be discussing in significant detail later today. But earlier this week, we did release our 2023 summer assessment. And I think we're seeing that the tremendous focus on resource adequacy within California in recent years is really starting to pay off. We are in significantly better shape this year going into the summer, meeting the 1 in 10 loss of load expectation standard. And in particular, as we get into the fall, into September, which we know is a period where there can be significant stress on the grid, we're looking at a potentially 2,300 megawatt surplus against the 1 in 10 standard. Just wanted to note tremendous accomplishment by our state agencies and our utilities and the team here at the ISO in onboarding over 8,000 megawatts of resources by September. That's the expectation, including 4,300 megawatts of batteries, 3,700 megawatts of solar, and another 500 megawatts of wind. This is just the result of tremendous energy, tremendous focus, really, and something that we're going to have to sustain for many years. And so, of course, we've also benefited from a very, very good hydro year in California, and just in general, I think across the West, feeling better positioned. Of course, as we'll also discuss, we remain exposed to significant extreme weather events, transmission outages, and other things like that. But I think the communication coordination that's happening within the state across the West, we feel much, much better prepared. Last week, of course, we had our Summer Readiness Leadership Roundtable. That's an opportunity to coordinate with not only within California, but also with the adjacent balancing authorities to review the status of the grid and resources and just the overall load resource balance. And I think all of us are feeling that we've made significant progress, but again, ever vigilant and making sure that we are able to avail ourselves of all the full suite of both supply side and demand side tools available to us. We'll continue with operational tabletop exercises going into the summer. Continued communication and coordination, making sure that everyone is fully familiar with all of the NERC energy emergency alert codes and all the language and vernacular around that. And also really appreciate the partnership here in California with the governor's office as we coordinate with the state agencies and all the utilities within our footprint. So a lot happening in summer and certainly encouraged by the focus and the energy that's gone into positioning us for better outcomes this summer. We are turning to our market development activities. We continue to make significant progress on the development of the tariff for our extended day-ahead market. We actually published the first draft of the tariff language back on March 30th. We held a stakeholder meeting on April 10th, received the first round of stakeholder comments on April 28th. And then earlier this week on the 15th, tomorrow, the 19th, and again, the 22nd, we'll be having workshops on the tariff language. We're continuing to target the end of June for our tariff filing with FERC. We'll, of course, keep close tabs on the progress we're making, make sure that all of our stakeholders feel as though they're getting a real opportunity to provide us with the necessary feedback, and we'll keep everybody posted on our timing. Separately, of course, we're in the process of developing systems and software requirements to support EDAM implementation. We are onboarding some new staff to make sure that we're fully resourced for EDAM, and also to make sure that we can continue the high level of service quality for our energy imbalance market participants. And we've also started onboarding discussions with PacifiCorp and continuing to target spring 2025 for their onboarding and the commencement of EDAM operations. So tremendous appreciation for all of the folks who are working with us to continue making progress on the extended day-ahead market. With respect to the day-ahead market enhancements, the DAME product, I think all of us are still feeling very encouraged by the conversation yesterday in the joint session. Just another round of thanks to all the folks who participated in the successful preparation of that proposal. Appreciate the WIM governing body and the Board of Governors for the unanimous vote in affirming the day-ahead market enhancements. I think that was a critical milestone. We also know we have more work to do. There are a number of uncertainties and tunable parameters associated with that product, and we're looking forward to beginning to establish the implementation work groups going forward that will help us to stay very connected with our stakeholders as we go into the testing and the scenario development and the guiding principles for how we're going to approach the implementation of that product. Particularly really appreciated the input from the Market Surveillance Committee, from Susan Pope, the WM body market expert, and just in general, a tremendous amount of input. Tough issue, a challenging product, but excited to be able to move forward with that feature, which is going to be a critical element of managing day ahead to real-time uncertainty, minimizing operator intervention, and providing real value for the extended day-ahead market. Turning to the resource efficiency evaluation enhancements, phase 2, as you may recall, the ISO received approval during the December 2022 joint governance meeting to proceed with FERC for the filing on our RSE phase 2 changes. We actually filed those tariff revisions at FERC on March 31st and are expecting an order near the start of summer operating season. We're also in the process of revising our business practices that relate to these policy changes, including language in our business practice manuals that govern the conditions under which the ISO would utilize the assistance energy transfer functionality. So a lot happening on RSEE, which we know is a core element of the foundation of the trust and cooperation behind our markets. Turning our attention to another items that are on the agenda here today, and something for which I'm just extremely proud of the team and just deeply appreciative of all the collaboration. I think we all recognize here, certainly at the ISO, that one of our most important responsibilities is supporting reliability, helping California to achieve its SB 100 targets, and coming to grips with the actual scale of the resource development that needs to take place in the coming years to keep us on track for meeting those goals of as much 7,000 megawatts of new generation each year for the next decade and beyond, is the development of our 2022-23 transmission plan. This plan is the result of a tremendous amount of effort, deep engagement with the state regulatory agencies, deep engagement with the stakeholders, the development community. It is a function of the first iteration of our increased coordination and synchronization through the MOU that we signed last December with the PUC and the Energy Commission, really trying to tighten the synchronization between power and transmission planning and interconnection queuing and procurement. And we believe that this plan really represents the next major installment of transmission infrastructure that's going to be necessary to onboard the next generation of resources. We did make one change as a result of stakeholder input. The final proposal that's being brought to you today is for 45 projects, price tag of $7.3 billion. We will continue to process the one project that was put aside for additional analysis, given some additional information that came in. And we're just excited to get moving. Obviously, the approval of the plan is in many cases only the first step. There's also a tremendous amount of activity and coordination and follow through and implementation that has to happen on the other side of that plan. But if there's one word that comes to mind, certainly I know we share here at the ISO and with our many partners in the California, it's the sense of urgency. Transmission development, if we want to stay ahead of the curve and have transmission be a proactive planning element for California that shapes interconnection queuing and shapes procurement, now is the time for that pivot. And we are just very excited with all the support and encouragement to move in this new direction. So looking forward to the conversation later today. Of course, the associated issue there is with respect to interconnection process enhancements. I think we all recognize not only in California, but across the country, just the absolute importance of breaking through many of the frictional problems associated with interconnection queuing. It's just an acute issue that we need to take on. We're excited today to talk about the interconnection process enhancements phase 1, track 1, that we're bringing forward today, and to really work across the course of the balance of 2023 with the broad array of stakeholders who are dependent on our ability to process queues and to make sure that the queue is a real reflection of where the state is heading on transmission capacity. And so we're looking forward to eventually bringing back to you in December this year a really transformational package of interconnection process queue enhancements so that we can continue to make real progress in onboarding new resources. So excited for the conversation today, and many, many thanks in advance to my team here at the CAISO, who's just done an amazing job, and really to our many partners whose input and encouragement has just been indispensable to getting us to this point. Finally, I just wanted to mention with respect to the Western Energy Imbalance Market, another really encouraging development back on April 5th. We announced the official entry of 3 new participants into the WEIM. That was the Western Area Power Administration, Desert Southwest, El Paso Electric, and Avangrid. With the onboarding of these three entities, the WIM now represents nearly 80% of the demand for electricity in the Western interconnection, and EIM remains the foundation stone on which we continue to build and hopefully strengthen our market platform in the weeks, months, and years ahead. So each of those three entities had fabulous onboarding. Hats off to their technical teams. It was great to hear from them earlier this week at the general session for the WIM governing body, and we're just super excited to have these new entities as part of the WEIM family. So with that, that concludes my opening comments for today. Really excited for the dialogue today and hopefully getting to some fabulous outcomes for California and the many customers and stakeholders we serve. So with that, Chair Leslie, back to you.
Well, Elliot, I just want to say, and I think my colleagues would share my enthusiasm for this comment, that we really owe you a debt of thanks, because I think the timing of your becoming our CEO really mattered, and that you have really stepped up to get us to where we need to go. And I think the work you've done with the other departments, the other agencies here in California and across the West has really been historic. And that these real benchmarks we're hitting of 8,000 new megawatts of integrated power are the first time we've seen that much power integrated on the grid, maybe ever. And that the fact that we can keep that pace going and reliably deliver power, not only in California, but in the broader West is extremely important to our economic development and our ability to make this transition. So I just want to thank you for that and for the work you've done and the work that the ISO staff has done, because I don't think it's business as usual the last couple of years, not even close.
Well, of course, Chair Leslie, thank you. Of course, I appreciate that, but I am nothing but a reflection of my fabulous team and our many partners who I am just profoundly grateful for. So thank you. It's an honor to be able to represent such fabulous people on such important issues. So thank you very much.
Well, good. And I'd also say that the fact that we have now adopted the EDAM and that we owe a debt of gratitude to our governing board partners, of which Chair Rob Konzioka will be giving us a report next. I just want to thank Rob and the WEIM governing board for their partnership, and I think it's a good one. And I think we're proving that you can lead, you can work together as a Western alliance, in addition to and reach these new benchmarks. And I think we're laying the path to do that. So, Chair Konzioka.
Sound check.
You're good.
We
Thank
can
you.
hear you.
So Chair Leslie, Vice Chair Shorey, and governors, and welcome to new board member Joe Edo. Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to provide an update on the governing body. Chair Leslie, thank you for those comments. I will certainly pass those on to the other governing body members. And I think likewise that we feel the same way, that there is a good relationship and an ability to work together and make things happen. So my report today will cover the governing body meeting that took place 2 days ago on May 16th. We started with Elliot providing a CE report. We then moved on to Utah Public Service Commission Chair Thad LeVar, Chair of the Body of State Regulators, providing us an update on BOSHR activities. Josh Walters, Chair of the Regional Issues Forum, providing an update on the RIF activities. The governing body market expert, Susan Pope, provided us a presentation on her advisory opinion on the DAME proposal. As you know, her opinion was supportive. Her memo and presentation material were posted and included in your board package. Last month, as Elliot just noted, that 3 new entities went live with the Western Energy Imbalance Market: the Avangrid, El Paso Electric, and Western Area Power Administration Desert Southwest Region. The good part is we received a briefing from CLED on the implementation. We then had representatives from each of those companies provide us with their perspectives on their journey of being integrated into and becoming participants in the Western Energy Imbalance Market. And I'm really pleased to say that this has been another real success story And now approximately 79% of the load in the Western Interconnection now participates in the Western Energy Imbalance Market. Then lastly, we received a briefing from Anna McKenna on the governing body calendar outlook for the rest of 2023. This concludes my report, and I'm happy to respond to any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for Chair Conzioka? Hearing none, we thank you for your report, and we look forward to seeing you back in July. It's my pleasure now to introduce the decision on the 22-23 transmission plan. Neil Millar, the VP of Infrastructure and Operations Planning, will be giving us an overview and presentation. Neil.
And while Neil's queuing up, let me just note for the record that we did receive one public comment letter from Northern California Power Agency on the 2022-2023 transmission plan, and that has been provided to the board.
Thank you, Chair Leslie, and thank you, Mr. Collington. It's Neil Miller here. First, just responding to the comment about the letters, there were a few issues raised in the course of those letters that I'd like to spend a few minutes on just addressing after Jeff Billington has walked through his presentation and presented the plan itself, so I'd be happy to respond at that time. But first, I will be asking Jeff Billington, our Director of Transmission Infrastructure Planning, to present the 2022-23 for your approval. But before turning the microphone over to Jeff, I first wanted to make a few comments. First, I want to thank Jeff and his team for the outstanding effort that went into the development of this year's transmission plan. I also want to thank the Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, our transmission owners, and our stakeholders for their efforts and support in getting to today. It is a team effort. I also wanted to highlight two key features of this year's transmission plan that I think will be apparent as Jeff walks through his presentation. First, the plan reflects a more proactive and strategic approach in studying and recommending new transmission infrastructure needed to reliably and efficiently meet California's clean energy objectives over the next decade and beyond. The new, more proactive approach in this year's transmission plan aligns with the Memorandum of Understanding outlining enhanced planning coordination that was signed in December last year by the leaders of the ISO, the CPUC. Developed in close collaboration with the Public Utilities Commission and Energy Commission, reflecting input from load-serving entities and other stakeholders, this year's plan and its new approach is designed to better synchronize power and transmission planning, interconnection queuing, and resource procurement to set the foundation for that additional coordination. Second, this 22-23 transmission plan represents the next major installment of infrastructure investment required to meet California's clean energy goals, with recommendations totaling $7.3 billion, which is the largest the ISO has produced. This installment addresses the grid's needs for pivoting to adding 40,000 megawatts of new installed capacity over the next 10 years, and also addresses many of the needs to achieve a trajectory of at 70,000 in 10 years. There was a sensitivity in this year's plan and is the goal of next year's trend. We are very sensitive to the issue of costs and the need to maintain reliability and achieve state energy goals cost effectively. Close coordination with the regulatory agency.
Neil, I'm sorry. Neil, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're really faint and cutting out a bit. Can you get closer to your microphone?
Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that.
Thanks. Oh,
thanks. We're very sensitive to the issue of costs and the need to maintain reliability and achieve state energy goals cost effectively. In close coordination with the regulatory agencies, load-serving entities, and other key stakeholders, we are seeking to address the state's reliability and policy needs in the most cost-effective and efficient way possible. With that, I will now turn it over to Jeff to present the 22-23 transmission plan. Jeff?
Thanks, Neil. Good afternoon, Chair Leslie and members of the board. As Neil indicated, I'll be presenting the decision item on the ISO's 22-23 transmission plan. Next slide, please. And so with this presentation, it's outlining the information that we're recommending within the ISO's transmission plan for approval today. And as Neil and Elliot both indicated, we're at an inflection point with the acceleration of the new resource requirements to meet the state's goals and these increasing pace of also the load growth associated with the climate change goals as well. And with this, the capital cost within this plan has increased from past plans, and as Neil indicated, the $7.3 billion being the largest of transmission plans that we brought forward by the ISO for approval. But with this, the ISO is always focused on the costs, and the recommendations within the plan are based upon the long-term effectiveness and efficiency of the solutions to address and meet the climate change goals of the state, and also the reliability of the ISO's controlled system. So, next slide, please. And as also has been indicated, this year's transmission plan sets kind of a foundation of a focused zonal approach for the resource development to address these rapidly escalating new resource needs. And again, as indicated, the strategic direction for this transformational change was established in the Memorandum of Understanding signed by the California Public Utilities Commission, California Energy Commission, and the California ISO in December. And in particular, this MOU and strategic direction tightens the linkages between the resource and transmission planning, the procurement direction, and the ISO interconnection process. In addition to tightening those linkages, it also creates a formal linkage between the California Energy Commission's SB 100 and IPER activities and the ISO and the California Public Utilities Commission's processes. And it reaffirms the existing state agency and the single forecast set coordination, particularly within the resource and transmission planning process. Next slide, please. And so as we look at the climate change goals, they're also driving escalating load forecasts, as can be seen in the diagram or the figure here, with the escalating of the forecast from the various transmission planning processes prior to this one. And this forecast is, as I indicated with regards to the single forecast set, is used by the ISO in our transmission planning process, as well as by the CPUC and the integrated resource planning, with the various weather year or weather event forecasts for the various types of studies, be it the reliability or our policy or our economic studies. And in this year's transmission plan, the forecast that we utilized is the dotted line that's identified on the graph, which reflects the CEC's 2021 IPER forecast, however, utilizing the high transportation electrification scenario that they developed as part of their IPER process. Next slide, please. And with Neil and Elliot have also indicated, as we look at the climate change goals of the state, as well as the escalating load forecast that I identified, is leading to unprecedented resource needs being identified to meet the long-term goals. And if we look in the green shaded area, the base portfolio for this year's transmission planning process was based upon approximately 40 gigawatt of new renewable resources. And then the CPUC also provided us with a sensitivity portfolio that in the 10-year horizon was around 70 gigawatt, and by 2035 was about 86 gigawatt. And so this is what we used in planning and doing the policy analysis, identifying what was needed within the policy or in the base case, but also reflecting, looking at what was in the sensitivity as we looked at alternatives to meet the needs that were being identified based upon the base portfolio. In the gray area, it provides, and as Neil indicated again, the CPUC has provided for us the base portfolio for next year's transmission planning process. And it is effectively the same as the sensitivity portfolio that was provided, that we assessed in this year's transmission planning process. And as you look at the next year's portfolio, and then the graph on the right is the scenario that was utilized within the 20-year transmission planning horizon. And as you can see with the portfolios that we have this year, next year, we're on a trajectory to plan the transmission system to meet those goals in the longer term and in the 2040, 2045 timeframe. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? This graph, as we look at it and as we've talked about it, part of our transition in this year's transmission plan was to utilize a zonal approach for the areas of the resource development, which will provide and enables a clear kind of direction and prioritization in the interconnection processes and procurement as to where we're planning the transmission system to meet and to enable the resources that are identified within the CPUC's portfolios, and in particular within these zones, the portfolios in the base, and as well as I indicated, the sensitivity that's identified in each of these zones. And so that's the graph on the right as we look at it, and the zones that we're planning to and the capacities of the portfolio. If you look on the graph on the left, this is the graph from the diagram from the 20-year outlook. It identifies in the geographical areas the resources that we're looking at and the high level of the transmission solutions that were identified within the 20-year plan. And this helps to having the 20-year and the longer term as we're looking at the needs, the solutions that we're recommending, and how they fit into the longer term as we've identified in the 20-year outlook that we developed and posted last May of 2022. In this slide, as we're looking at it, as we go forward, this analysis, or the analysis of the transmission planning process, is conducted in a sequential manner, starting with the reliability assessment to identify the reliability-driven needs projects, then the policy assessment to identify the policy-driven project needs, taking into consideration the reliability needs, and the economic analysis or assessment to identify any market efficiency needs, again, taking into consideration the policy and reliability needs in a multi-valued kind of approach. In addition, we undertake every 2 years a 10-year local capacity technical study, and that was undertaken in this planning cycle and documented in the transmission plan. And in addition, the interregional process is a 2-year process, which is coordinated with the other planning regions, Northern Grid and WestConnect, for consideration of interregional transmission project proposals as potential solutions to regional needs. We're in year 1 of the process, and there are no projects identified to be brought into year 2 in next year's transmission planning cycle to be assessed. Next slide, please. In the reliability assessment, there was 24 reliability projects that have been identified that are driven by load growth and the evolving grid conditions as the generation fleet transitions to the increased renewable, and that management is recommending for approval. The estimated cost of the 24 reliability projects is $1.76 billion, and none of the reliability-driven projects are eligible for competitive solicitation as the upgrades are to existing systems or less than 200 kV. Next slide, please. In addition, there were 3 previously approved transmission projects on hold from the previous transmission planning process or planning cycles. And with these projects, management is recommending the following: to keep the Moraga Sobrante 115 kV line for conductor project on hold, and then to cancel the North of Mesa project. And with this is to relocate the previously recommended procured storage as a mitigation plan at the Mesa from the 115 kV bus to the 230 kV bus, and approve the Mesa spare transformer project that is included in the 24 reliability projects above, or that I described previously. And then the third project that was hold, we're recommending to remove it from being on hold, and that's the Wheeler Ridge Junction project, with a minor scope modification to that project. And so that's what we're recommending for the three projects that were on hold from the previous cycle. Next slide. This table illustrates the 21 reliability or 21 policy-driven projects that have been identified as being needed and recommended for approval for a total of $5.53 billion. Of these 21 projects, 3 are eligible for competitive solicitation. And as Elliot indicated in the opening, and Neil as well, the Trout Canyon to Lugo 500 kV line project that we had included in the draft transmission plan, we're recommending to hold this back pending some additional analysis based upon stakeholder input that we've received, and we'll be bringing this forward to the board at a later date. Next slide, please. And then, consistent with our annual transmission planning process, we did conduct economic studies investigating opportunities to reduce the total costs of ratepayers through transmission upgrades that not otherwise needed for reliability and renewable serving the load, and looking in terms of to seek for market efficiencies in the analysis. There was no projects that are driven solely by market efficiency that are being considered or recommended in this plan. Next slide, next. There is, as we're continuing and with this transmission plan, there are some additional recommendations that we may bring forward at a later date as a part of this planning cycle. These include the Swift North transmission project to access wind from Idaho. The ISO has been coordinating with Idaho Power and is looking, and they are looking at potential need for capacity on this line also, but in the south to north direction, as a part of their integrated resource planning. So we're continuing that and that analysis and coordination, as well as potential opportunities for DOE funding on these facilities. And so we'll look at bringing this forward at a later date. One of the other projects was the Pacific Transmission Expansion Project, which is an HVDC cable from the Diablo 500 kV substation to the LA Basin's 230 kV system. The ISO continues to coordinate with the CPUC on potential policy direction on gas retirement in local areas, which is not identified in the current portfolios. And in addition, the ISO is collaborating with LADWP as a potential joint project as they look at needs for their system as well that this may be beneficial for. And then the third one is the project that I've referenced earlier, the Trout Canyon Lugo 500 kV project. That was included in the draft transmission plan. We're holding this back pending the additional analysis on the alternatives and based upon the stakeholder input. Next slide, please. In regards to the FERC Order 1000 interregional, and as I indicated earlier in the discussion, there were 7 potential projects that were submitted into the ISO's 2023 interregional transmission project submission window in the first quarter of 2022. Of those 7, only the North Gila Imperial Valley project met the requirements of an interregional transmission project in the submission validation process. And with that, we conducted further detailed analysis with WestConnect as well. Through the process, WestConnect's subsequent review did not find a need for this project for a regional need within WestConnect. However, the North Gila Imperial Valley 500 kV line was determined to be necessary for the ISO, and management is recommending approval of this project as a regional policy-driven project included in the projects that I identified as policy-driven in the earlier slides. Next slide, please. In the stakeholder process, there was comments by stakeholders throughout the entire stakeholder process of this planning cycle and on the draft transmission plan. There was general support for the reliability and economic assessment and the recommendations within this year's transmission plan. There was some concerns expressed with the advancing of projects that were largely driven by the sensitivity portfolios. So if we saw a need in the base or in those areas, looking at alternatives to advance projects that were in the sensitivity portfolio, which are also the baseline for next year's transmission planning process. There were also some concerns expressed with regards to the adequacy of transmission development in the Fresno and Kern area. And again, this was driven that there was the needs in the base portfolio did not identify needs. However, there are needs that are identified in the sensitivity portfolio only, in which that we couldn't advance to in this year's transmission plan, but we'll be addressing in next year's transmission plan as it will be in the base portfolio. And then there was also concerns expressed with regards to the impact of the high voltage access charge, transmission access charge, with the approval of $7.3 billion worth of additional transmission. And as we look at it, this is an important factor that the ISO considers, and as we look at the alternatives to address and meet the portfolios and the reliability needs of the load growth, as we look at the alternatives and the selection of those alternatives to meet those near-term and long-term needs in an effective and efficient manner. Next slide, please. So in summary, as we look at it, there's 45 projects that are being recommended. The management is recommending for approval for a total of $7.3 billion. And as I indicated earlier, there's 3 projects: the Imperial Valley north of Songs 500 kV line and substation, the north of Songs to Serrano 500 kV line, and the North Gila to Imperial Valley 500 kV line that are eligible for competitive procurement in phase 3 of the transmission planning process, subject to the approval of the plan. Next slide, please. And so with this, management is recommending that the ISO Board of Governors approve the ISO's 2022-2023 transmission plan. And as we've indicated, this established kind of a zonal basis for the resource development as a foundation for the interconnection process prioritization and for the procurement activities. And it also continues to pursue the low emission strategies in addressing the reliability needs of the ISO's control grid, and sets the foundation for the higher renewable energy goals while providing for prudent and economic development of the transmission system. And with that, that concludes the presentation.
Okay.
And it's Neil here. I might want to jump in now and just address the letter. Perhaps I could jump in and address the letter we received from the Northern California Power Agency. That's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So yes, we did receive, the Board of Governors did receive a letter, as Roger Collington indicated, on May 16th. I'm just going to paraphrase the high level of the concerns expressed in the letter and offer a bit of comment. First, a major theme of the letter was concern about the overall case of the transmission costs themselves. And as we've indicated a few times, this is also a concern we take very seriously. The transmission plan is the result of the coordination with the state agencies on the state energy needs, both for transformation of other industries as they transition to a cleaner footprint to electrify other energy sectors, as well as meeting the state's clean energy goals for electricity production. That also includes the work the Energy Commission does on the load forecasts and demand side capabilities. So what we take care of is, I'll say, what's left. And that's where the coordination around the inputs is critical. And the work done as well through the Public Utilities Commission's integrated resource planning effort to overall optimize the cost of resource development and transmission. That's where that optimization is currently taking place. And then our role is to really focus in on what's the most efficient and cost-effective alternatives to actually meet the identified transmission needs. So I want to assure you that we take these costs very seriously and they're examined throughout the process. NCPA also raises the issue of timing. There's a large amount of transmission that has been identified in past cycles that is moving forward through the process, and much of which is not yet online, as well as the amount of additional transmission we've identified in this transmission plan. The issue of prioritizing and managing the construction overall is serious, and another issue that will be a key focus in the years ahead. We've taken additional steps, such as the development of the Transmission Development Forum, which provides quarterly reporting by the utilities on their transmission project development status, and where they report any changes in schedule where stakeholders have an opportunity to review and offer input. So the prioritization effort here requires transparency, and we think between that and the information we provide in the transmission plan itself, there is now a great deal of transparency about the status of these transmission projects as a basis for the prioritization discussions if delays are necessary. NCPA also raises a concern about, and used the Trout Canyon to Lugo transmission project as an example, that in a number of cases in this year's transmission plan, we have sized alternatives where a need has been identified in studying the base case scenario. We have sized the alternatives to also meet the needs of the sensitivity case. In a number of cases, and in the Trout Canyon to Lugo circuit in particular, the solution was going beyond what would the minimum needed to meet the base case requirements by sizing the project to meet that 70 gigawatt in 10-year sensitivity. This was not an accident. This actually was the recommended direction from the Public Utilities Commission. And in the decision that they've already provided us for the portfolios that will be next year's base case, it is tied to the 70 gigawatt scenario. And we were strongly encouraged to take into account and get a head start on any upscaled projects that would meet the needs of that 70 gigawatt case. So that is an issue we're also taking seriously, that we need to get a head start on these major projects. But where we've been asking for approval for a project in this year's plan, a need was identified in the base case. If there was not any need identified in the base case, we are waiting until next year to move forward with those solutions. But like I said, in Southern California in particular, being able to use the sensitivity to scale the appropriate solution to provide the most effective long-term solution was a clear advantage in already knowing what next year's base case is going to look like. So I hope that helps just provide some context for both the letter and how we've been taking it into account.
Neil, this is Elliot. Governors, I'd like to just add one other comment. Thank you, Neil. Those are very good substantive responses. I also just in generally what I've, from NCPA, just a general sense of wanting to make sure that our process, which has admittedly been quite heavily focused on sort of CPUC and CEC coordination, is inclusive, and that there are really good opportunities for injects for the public utility, for the POUs as well, the publics. I think that's very important. Their transmission needs, their perspective on interconnection queuing as well. So we've initiated some outreach to NCPA and others to make sure that process really truly is inclusive of all the folks who have levels of dependency on the transmission system. So just wanted to make sure that registered as well. And thanks for those comments, Neil.
Yes, and thanks for that, Elliot. I should have mentioned that there is a separate letter that was submitted by NCPA specifically to the interconnection process changes. And yes, that touches on as well the concerns that we properly address the needs of the non-CPUC jurisdictional entities as well. And that's something we're taking very seriously.
Okay, so with that, I think we thank Jeff for the presentation, Neil for the clarity, and Elliot. And does the board have questions regarding the presentation? Severin.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I just want to clarify a few things and make sure that my understanding is right. So what's going on this year and what's discussed for next year is not the pathway of new investment for the next decade. the $7 billion this year and the discussion of a very large investment next year are getting ready now for the build out of renewables over the next 15 years and the load growth we're expecting with electrification. Is that right?
Yes, it's Neil. I'll take a shot at that and then see if Jeff has any additional comments. I agree that we are expecting, as I mentioned, this year's transmission plan is a very substantive first layer of reinforcement, and it also addresses many of the needs for that 70 gigawatt scenario that really sets a direction, feeding into the longer 20-year perspective. We did recognize that other issues like the North Coast wind requirements are going to be addressed next year. So we do see that there will be major development being brought forward in next year's plan as well. But both of these efforts align with what we had already identified as the longer term requirements in our 20-year outlook, and will be between the two plans really reinforcing and addressing the major corridors that need to be reinforced going forward. So we do see this year and next year bringing forward some major development, but those should be addressing the bulk of the major corridor requirements for a few more years, that this is not going to be a year over year at this level of expenditure. Jeff, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I fully agree with that. And like you indicated, it's kind of this plan is a step towards what was identified in the 20-year outlook, and not anticipating that it'll be a year over year, but like I said, indicating next year we'll have some potential significant transmission in the North Coast for the offshore wind that will be included in the base area, as well as in that Fresno Kern area, where there's significant in the sensitivity and was only in the sensitivity in those areas. But like you said, it's building as to what's identified in the 10-year to 2035 timeframe of transmission needs, in alignment with what we kind of identified, not project for project, but in the areas of need and major paths to get to that 20-year outlook timeframe.
Great. Okay, so just to put a pin in one point you made, all of this is consistent with the 20-year plan that got so much attention last year and that had a $30 billion price tag on it. We are not blowing through that with these expenditures.
No, these are aligned with the major corridor upgrades, a number of the major corridor upgrades that were identified in the outlook. We do want to be clear that there are a few specific areas that are not included in this year's plan, which is why we keep mentioning the offshore wind. It's not all of them
all this year.
It's not, but it's a very good start.
So my Excel spreadsheet says that if you amortize $7.3 billion over 30 years at an 8% real interest rate, it works out to a little under $3 per megawatt hour at 225 million annual megawatt hours. That seems, or 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour when that gets added into retail rates. And that is an upper bound. Well, that probably overestimates, because first of all, that doesn't account for load growth. And a big part of the purpose of this is load growth. And second of all, this transmission is going to last longer than 30 years, although I guess 30 years is the standard payoff period for it. So it seems like while $7.3 billion is something to be careful about, we should make clear that this is in terms of our current retail rates that are between 25 and 30 cents a kilowatt hour. This is not going to really be a big chunk of it. And I could do a lot of comparisons to things we spend money, other parts of our retail rates on. That's not to say we shouldn't be careful with ratepayers' money, but we should also keep the big $7.3 billion number, when we put it in the context of what it's providing, should be kept in context.
Thank you, Commissioner Bornstein. That sounded more like a statement than a question.
That was a statement, and thank you for promoting me to commissioner.
Okay,
something.
Commissioner Shorey.
Or demoting me, I'm not sure.
I didn't demote you. I didn't demote you. Vice Chair Shorey.
Oh, actually, I did have one other question.
Go ahead.
Page 174 has the time profile of the TAC. And so I just wanted to, I read the note that the $2 drop is due to decrease in transmission revenue balancing account adjustments and standby credit contribution below the historical projections. I don't need that all explained to me, but I think that is something apart from the current $7.3 billion proposal. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so basically taking that out, what we're seeing is something that's approximately consistent with the calculation I just talked about in terms of amortizing the extra expenditures. Right.
Yes, and in the planner, we referred to the estimate as being less than 0.5 cents because we were avoiding getting too precise on that. But yes,
and this
totally
obviously includes projections for futures, but yeah.
Yes. Now the graph you referred to on page 174 also includes previously approved projects that haven't come online yet. So it's not just, this graph is not just the 7.3.
Oh, but it does not include next year's anticipated payment.
No.
Okay, got it. So so that's why this increase is a bit larger than the amortization that I talked about.
Yes, it includes previously approved projects as they come online over the next 10 years, as well as the projects that we're seeking approval now.
Got it. Okay, sorry. Thank you. All yours.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Shorey.
Yes, thank you. Jeff and Neil, all I wanted to ask about a little bit is I'm sort of overwhelmed by the sheer number of projects, not just the cost, but just the sheer number of projects and the number of miles of projects that are going to need to be built that you've determined are needed for either policy reasons or reliability reasons. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you do as part of this process when you make a recommendation to us of these projects to test whether or not it's actually feasible to get these things built. What are the next steps? How does it work in terms of going ahead now and implementing it, assuming we approve the plan today? What comes next, and how do we assure that we're actually able to get these darn things built in the time frame that they're needed?
Sure, I'd be happy to start with some comments on that, and again, see if Jeff has anything to add. First off, in developing these alternatives, we have been developing them through a stakeholder process, as well as working with the transmission owners that are NERC registered transmission planners. So in developing a plan, we do get additional input about the feasibility of these projects. We do want, when you go into a permitting process, there's no guarantee that where you end up is where you started looking in the first place looking for, because the permitting process has to be responsive. But we do some preliminary check with the transmission owners that have good on boots on the ground knowledge of the terrain as to the feasibility of getting a right of way through those areas. So that's a very critical component. We don't want to be asking for approval where there's zero chance of actually acquiring a right of way. The other part though is that after the plan is approved, two things happen. Projects that represent the modification to existing facilities, which is the bulk of them, 42 in this case, those are in essence directly assigned to the incumbent utilities to get going and building those projects. That's under the terms of the transmission control agreement and our tariff that the utilities are then charged with working to bring those projects in. And they're not surprised. They have been working with us on the development of these alternatives. Also, the three larger ones and possibly the Trout Canyon to Lugo circuit, we then launch a competitive process for those major greenfield projects And our competitive process has been extremely successful at getting very capable developers interested in developing those projects. We have always had very good participation in our competitive solicitation processes. We've run that process 16 times. 11 projects have been awarded to competitive developers and non-incumbent transmission owners, and 2 to partnerships. So the competitive process, we've been very blessed with good, serious competition and very capable people participating in those processes. So they would be charged then with, after we go through that competitive process, the selected sponsor would then be proceeding with developing the permitting applications and moving forward. We also do need to consider the what kind of options or alternatives we have if we run into pushback. And, you know, a few years ago, we did approve a 230 kV overhead line in San Diego, but also clarified that it may be necessary to move underground. And ultimately in the permitting process, the circuit went underground. So we do need to consider our options and our fallback if we run into challenges in the permitting. The total industry capability to build all of this is something that's also been a serious concern, because the utilities have staff working on these projects, but also interconnections, wildfire hardening activities, as well as a lot of capital maintenance work that's also going on. So the prioritization is very important. And this is an issue that I know the Public Utilities Commission has also been paying attention to, in wanting to ensure that the utilities are positioned to get the transmission built that we need in order to maintain reliability and achieve the state clean energy goals. So we focus primarily on schedule, but the Public Utilities Commission has also been very active on this issue of preparedness for not just our projects, but the entire suite of what it takes to meet these clean energy goals.
Good, good. Thank you.
I want to see if there's any other questions. Commissioner Edo, Commissioner. No. Okay. I just have one quick question before we go to public comment. Neil or Jeff, I just want to clarify. On page 127, there's a whole group interregional transmission coordination ITP submissions to the ISO. That what we're voting on today does not include these per se. That these are projects that are dealt with in a different way, right, Neil?
Yes. Yeah, you're not being asked. I should clarify, there was one project on that list, the North Gila Imperial Valley #2 circuit, that did not get any traction through the interregional process, but it is a project that we're asking you to approve today as an ISO-driven regional transmission project.
Right.
We have been in discussions with the Imperial Irrigation District, and we do believe that they will have interest in participating. But that is something we will be exploring after the project has been approved. But having your approval will allow us to work with them on if there's a joint effort there. Jeff also mentioned that we are also actively working with Idaho Power, and also with have approached the Department of Energy about potential funding around the SWIP North transmission project, but that would be coming in later. The other projects, no, we're not in any active discussion right now. Well, actually, the HVDC Pacific Transmission Expansion Project is also on this continuing discussion, but it's not for approval today.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so with that, Roger, I think we can move to public comment.
Yes. So Michelle, if we can queue it up for public comment and let us know if there are any commenters on the line.
All right, so once again, to make a comment verbally, click the raise hand icon located at the bottom of the screen to place yourself in the queue. When it is your turn to speak, simply click the unmute button in the pop-up message that will appear on your screen. If you are dialed into today's meeting via regular phone audio, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the queue. Please remember to state your name and affiliation prior to your comments. It looks like we do have some commenters on the line. Go to Ed. Ed, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Good afternoon. This is Ed Smeloff. Greetings to the Board of Governors, to Chair Leslie and Vice Chair Shorey. It's a pleasure to be in front of you, and I am speaking today on behalf of the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies. We enthusiastically support this transmission plan, and we are very encouraged by the work that your staff has done in putting together a really remarkable document, and one that will lead the state of California forward. It really does mean a new starting point with this zonal focus, and we think that is a clear way to provide guidance and leadership to the load serving entities and to developers to focus on areas where we can accomplish things and get new projects developed. So we encourage your support of this. I do want to make a couple of additional comments. We're very encouraged as well by the desire to coordinate with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power on transmission projects that can serve both balancing authorities. It's very important, and it's a priority among environmental and environmental justice groups to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel power plants within the greater Los Angeles basin. And the answer to doing that is largely dependent on getting new transmission projects, including the project that Neil Miller mentioned about from Diablo into the LA basin. We also are very encouraged by the fact that you are going to focus in your 23-24 plan on the Central Valley. There's a lot of potential for solar battery development in the Central Valley. It was identified in the sensitivity case, which will become the base case for you in the 23 and 24 plan. And we recognize that on Path 15 and Path 26, there are some challenges to do the quantities of new generation. So encouraged by that focus. We also, to respond to sort of Governor Bornstein's question, the fact that we're going to see load growth, perhaps load growth greater than what's been currently anticipated by the Energy Commission, is going to have a positive impact on reducing the per unit cost of the transmission access charge. So we think that it's a reasonable way of providing additional reliability for a highly electrified economy to build these transmissions, and it's certainly cost effective to spread it across more megawatt hours of production. And then lastly, Governor Shorey brought up the issue of, can we get this work done? And I believe we can, but it does depend on the PUC to expedite permitting under its permitting processes. And very importantly, it does require the transmission owners to be able to build these in a timely manner. And not to pick on one utility, but what you've done, I think, is really, or your staff has done, a very good process of transparency. In Chapter 8, you list all of the projects that are in progress right now on the transmission front. And I think I'd encourage everyone to look at it. You will see an enormous backlog by Pacific Gas and Electric Company. And, they're facing challenges on a number of fronts. And it really is important that they are, prove themselves capable to get these projects done. And if they're not capable of doing it, the state of California needs to look at alternative ways of getting these needed projects built in a timely manner. So thank you again for the opportunity to address you, and best of luck, and enthusiastically encourage you to adopt the transmission plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move to the next commenter in queue. Kathleen, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Great, thank you. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Hello, Chair Leslie and Vice Chair Shorey and fellow governors, as well as CAISO leadership team. As I mentioned, this is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Vistra supports the board approving the 2022-2023 transmission plan being recommended today. Given California's long-term emission reduction goals that will be met by clean energy and carbon neutral resources, the recommended transmission enhancements are needed to allow the grid to evolve and then to allow the grid to evolve to reliably support its needs while advancing these policy goals. To advance the emission reduction and clean energy transition goals, in addition to the projects being brought to you today, and I think Ed mentioned that there's been previously approved projects, one of them is of particular interest to Vistra. Vistra believes that we hold a shared goal to facilitate the retirement of the legacy reliability must-run jet-fueled Oakland Power Plant. In the 2017-2018 transmission plan, the board approved the Oakland Clean Energy Initiative to help facilitate the retirement of Vistra's jet-fueled reliability must-run units through an integrated, multifaceted solution that includes both transmission upgrades as well as an in-front-of-the-meter energy storage project. This is not the only project of its kind. There have been others brought forward to the board for approval in the past.
You're right.
I also want to echo Ed. I think Section 8 is a great addition or inclusion in the plan, and it includes a section on which projects rely on preferred resources. That transparency is a great step. And I know we had it last year. We want to echo that information the CAISO's team is providing is really useful. That said, Vistra has faced challenges completing the OCEI project's requirement to develop a preferred resource in the Oakland area. We have observed that there is confusion externally on whether or not the board approved Oakland Clean Energy Initiative project, which included the in-front-of-the-meter energy storage project, is in fact still required. This confusion has made it difficult to complete the OCEI project component of this preferred resource. In part, the lack of clarity on whether OCEI includes a new resource requirement continues to extend the timeline for reliance on the Oakland jet-fueled units that are under RMR. We've shared these challenges with the planning and infrastructure team led by Neil and Jeff, your planning team, to help explore how to make the CAISO requirements for projects clear that have a reliance on preferred resources. We're making these comments today both to raise this up to the board's awareness, but also because I want to acknowledge the special efforts of the CAISO's planning and infrastructure team to collaborate with Vistra on the RMR retirement challenges, including this confusion. We deeply appreciate that CAISO is continuing to explore how to improve clarity on this point through additional transparency, like in Section 8, through greater inputs and assumptions discussions. But we continue to be concerned that even with that additional transparency in the Section 8, I think it's Section 8.2, relying on preferred resources, that there's going to continue to be confusion on whether or not there is a requirement for those preferred resources in the integrated multifaceted solutions, including in the previously approved Oakland Clean Energy Initiative that's listed in that section. We believe that there may be a role for additional clarity from the CAISO Board of Governors as well as the CAISO management team to help express your expectations for new preferred resources to be procured and developed to meet a portion of any of the integrated solutions that you are approving, either in this plan, in prior plans, any of these projects to be successful. There may be a role for additional clarity. We hope that the CAISO and the Board of Governors will consider supporting additional clarity efforts so that the projects that include developing preferred resources can be fully completed such that the net benefits that supported recommending those projects can be materialized. We will hope to continue to partner with our stakeholders and CAISO to further the shared goal of retiring the Oakland jet-fueled RMR units through ensuring the transmission system can meet the local needs. And again, I just really want to thank the team. They're putting in a lot of extra effort on this particular sensitive issue of how do we successfully strive towards retiring these units to further the long-term California goals. And thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Would staff like to respond?
Sure, it's Neil here. I'll start with that and then turn it over to Jeff. So, just by way of recap, when we do bring forward to the board for approval a transmission plan and have identified that preferred resources being targeted in a specific area are a better solution, that is something that after the board approves the plan, we then take on working with the relevant regulatory authorities and industry to try to cause to come into effect. So we will be continuing to do everything we can to support the development of those resources as part of that overall plan, and see what else we can do to help support and drive that home. Because unfortunately, our fallback on this, if not successful, would be to have to recommend a less effective transmission option if we're not successful in getting the preferred resources developed where they're needed. To us, this is a real opportunity using preferred resources that are needed in any event for system purposes to be located specifically in particular areas that can meet both the local needs as well as their system overall requirements. We think that's the most effective outcome overall, and we'll be continuing to support that. So I know my team have already put a lot of work in, as Kathleen indicated. We'll also be working additionally with them to see if there are additional opportunities and what it takes to get this across the finish line.
Kathleen, does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. I just will reiterate, and I think Neil emphasized it really well. There's a lot of work involved in what the CAISO is doing to try to communicate this out. And if there is a question embedded in my briefing, I would say it is just to encourage the board to continue to support in your avenues where you may, this is a challenge because the CAISO is recommending a project that includes a generation component, which necessarily means that this California Public Utility Commission then needs to take a proactive action to require that procurement to facilitate that component. So this is a really good example of cross-entity collaboration and need. I want to emphasize, I think that there is already great collaboration, especially in the recent plans. The OCEI project that we're discussing is from the 2017-2018 plan, which was a first mover or one of the first movers in this type of project. And so we've done a lot of learning by doing, and there have been some clear routes for success for the recent plans, but these older projects that were approved, I think have just fallen off the radar. And so we're striving to bring transparency and highlight this again. I deeply appreciate the CAISO, Neil's team, Jeff, Deb, everyone is putting in effort. I wanted the board to be aware of how much effort and just to thank them for their time.
Thank you. And Roger, are there other questions in the queue?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we're moving to the next.
I'm sorry, I was on mute talking away. We do have others.
That's okay. Susan, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, this is Susan Schneider from Phoenix Consulting, and I am speaking on behalf of the Large Scale Solar Association, or LSA. LSA very strongly supports the CAISO's approach in the transmission plan for this year, and in particular, working within the tariff to mitigate the overloads that are identified in the base case, but taking a look at the sensitivity case in order to identify the actual mitigation proposals. The availability of the base case for the next cycle at this time is a very, very big improvement to the whole overall process. So the CAISO was able to get a head start on improving transmission that would otherwise have had to wait to next year, potentially, and because we know now what the base case will be for next year. So kudos to the CPUC for providing that information earlier than in the past, and kudos to the CAISO for then using that information to basically allow for continuity and an early start on the upgrades needed for next time. So we're very, very strongly supportive of that process and appreciate the CAISO being creative within the bounds that are laid out within the tariff. That said, we are somewhat concerned about the lack of upgrades approved in the northern part of the state. We do understand that because those overloads were not triggered through the base case this time, that we will have to wait till next time to look at that. But and so in the Fresno-Kern area in particular, and other areas of the north, this is a concern. However, we look forward to next year working with the CAISO and within the process. And you know, anyway, this is a very big process improvement this time, and LSA urges you to approve the plan as proposed. And again, kudos to the CAISO staff for taking this approach and moving forward in the way that it's done this year in this cycle. Thank you.
Thank you.
I showed two more. I showed Martin Wyspiański. Hopefully I pronounced it that right. That was a good challenge.
You nailed it. I'm impressed. Yes, I'm Martin Wyspiański. I'm the Vice President of Electric Asset Management, part of PG&E's electric engineering team. I just wanted to thank the board for the opportunity to speak. We applaud the work that the CAISO staff has completed this year in preparing the transmission plan. PG considers this effort as highly valuable for policymakers, planners, and stakeholders as the state really moves towards a clean energy future. In particular, I want to thank Jeff Billington and his transmission team for the close coordination collaboration with our transmission planning team over the last year to identify reliability solutions in our service area. We also appreciate the changes that were made to the plan in response to some of the comments we made. Again, as mentioned earlier, out of the 45 projects approved, 18 are our service territory, 16 reliability, and 2 policy, with an estimated cost of about $1.25 billion. We also want to mention that we support bringing the Wheeler Ridge Junction substation off of the on-hold list and proceeding with implementation. So we support CAISO's decision to restart this project. And we also agree with the other reliability and policy projects in PG&E service territory. We understand the urgency for initiating building of the proposals, given the substantial quantities of renewable resources we expect to come onto the system over the years. And we recognize that there are costs associated with that and support CAISO and other state agencies working together to ensure the transition to a decarbonized electric grid is as cost effective as possible. So again, we want to thank CAISO staff for accepting our comments and for working closely with us on the planning process, and we support approval of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Vishal Patel on the queue.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Vishal Patel from Southern California Edison. Good afternoon, Chair Leslie, Vice Chair Shiori, Governors, President Mainzer, and CAISO leadership. My name is Vishal Patel, and I am a Principal Manager in the Asset Strategy and Planning Department at Southern California Edison. SCE commends the CAISO on the development and results of the 2022-2023 transmission plan, and greatly and genuinely appreciates the extensive effort and time put in by CAISO staff to produce this plan. SCE strongly supports the CAISO's proactive and coordinated approach to identify and plan for the required transmission investment to comprehensively meet the future needs of the CAISO-controlled transmission grid. CAISO's strategic and proactive approach should be fruitful in bringing online the surge in generation resources as we continue to transition towards a carbon-free electric grid. The 2022-2023 transmission plan is headed in the right direction to strengthen the reliability of the grid and to increase resource deliverability as the grid continues to decarbonize and customers increase their consumption of electricity. The 24 identified reliability projects is the scale of investment needed to mitigate reliability concerns due to both significant load growth and challenges related to the integration of renewable generation. The 21 policy-driven projects should facilitate the timely interconnection of resources identified in the CPUC's renewable generation portfolios to reduce GHG emissions. The 3 projects eligible for competitive solicitation are needed transformational baseline transmission projects to both access intrastate renewable resources and import out-of-state wind resources. SCE hopes that these competitive solicitations will be conducted with all participants and project sponsors on a level and fair playing field to make sure that these projects are planned, developed, and constructed in the most cost-effective, environmentally conscious, and risk-averse manner as possible for the benefit of the grid, California's ratepayers, and all electricity customers. Finally, the 2022-2023 transmission plan is in alignment with the goals outlined in SCE's Pathway 2045 white paper, which identifies up to $75 billion of required grid investments between 2030 and 2045 to integrate bulk renewable generation and storage and serve the load growth associated with transportation and building electrification. SCE believes that the CAISO has adequately considered costs given the magnitude of challenges we face to achieve these goals and chose the best suite of technical solutions with affordability in mind. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment on behalf of SCE regarding the 2022-2023 transmission plan, and SCE strongly urges the board's approval of this plan.
Excellent, thank you. Michelle, do we have anyone else on the line or otherwise in the queue?
There are currently no additional callers in.
Thank you. I turn it back to you, Chair Leslie, and if you have any questions, comments, or anything further from the board or management, or we can move to a motion.
Right. Are there any additional comments from the board? No. Seeing none, Roger, it looks like we can proceed to read the motion.
Excellent, thank you. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the ISO 2022-2023 transmission plan attached to the memorandum dated May 10, 2023. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved, Jan.
Thank you, Jan. And second?
Second.
That was Joe. I don't have your voice down yet, so I'm learning. Governor Borenstein, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Edo.
Aye.
Governor Kolotova.
Aye.
Chair Leslie.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes. Back to you, Chair Leslie.
Congratulations, Neil. You have a plan. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the next item, the decision on interconnection process enhancements for 2023 track 1. Neil Millar, VP of Infrastructure and Operations, you are up again.
Well, first, thank you for the approval we just received. That's very much appreciated, and it's a great team, so thank you very much. Next, though, I will be asking now Bob Emmert, our Senior Manager of Interconnection Resources, to present a decision item recommending certain changes to our current study process. It's referred to as track 1 of our interconnection process enhancements. Before I turn the microphone over to Bob, I do want to just make a few comments about this. First, I want to thank Bob and his team for their work in initiating this the overall stakeholder process associated with the interconnection process enhancements and getting us to this point. As Bob will explain in more detail, the approval being sought today focuses on some pressing schedule changes that are foundational to setting the stage for the development and implementation of the broader transformational changes that they're also working on. That next step in the development of those changes will be taken later this month when we release a straw proposal that's collected various options already developed through some preliminary stakeholder input, and that will be the start of the more in-depth stakeholder engagement. We do expect that stakeholder engagement in particular to focus on a workshop approach. And I do want to put a bit of a plug in right now that we do want to emphasize with our stakeholders the importance of participating and providing meaningful input into our future workshops on these topics, because it is critical that these process changes that we're working on not only work for the ISO, but it's more important that they also reflect the needs of the resource development community, the parties that are responsible for procuring resources, and the industry overall. So we'll be really looking for and encouraging good participation in the future workshops. Now, we do expect that process to lead to recommendations that we will be bringing back for your approval in December. Also, as Elliot indicated in the opening comments, the most recent interconnection request window has really reinforced the need for these transformational changes. As Bob will explain in detail, the number of applications we received in April far surpassed our expectations that really reinforce that we do need to make these changes and get on with it. So with that, I'll turn the microphone over to Bob Emmert. Bob?
All right, thank you, Neil, and good afternoon, governors. And if we could move to the next slide, please. So as Neil stated, we're coming to you today to request approval of our initial tariff changes that set the stage for broader transformative changes that we'll be pursuing within the IPE stakeholder initiative. What we're discussing today are adjustments to the timing of the processing of Cluster 15 interconnection requests. Those requests were received during the first half of the month of April of this year. And so that's the main crux of track one, is to deal with the tariff changes that are necessary for us to, in essence, adjust the timing for Cluster 15 so that we can go on and deal with some of the other components within the IPE process, such as these changes will enable us to develop the broader transformative changes that we want to accomplish in the track 2 stakeholder discussions within IPE. And those transformative changes will impact actually how we study Cluster 15, as well as the following clusters beyond that. And as Neil said, we anticipate bringing that to you in December. These changes also allow for a timely processing of the detailed studies, the phase 2 studies for Cluster 14 resources that applied in 2021. We've received, well, as most people remember, we had what we call the super cluster, Cluster 14, where we received a very large number of projects, and the projects that proceeded into phase 2 was again a record number. So phase 2 studies for Cluster 14 are going to take a significant effort on behalf of the ISO and the participating transmission owners that perform those studies. So by delaying Cluster 15, that'll give us an opportunity to get those studies done and out to the interconnection customers. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So I won't go into this in much detail, as this is pretty much the same slide that Jeff presented earlier. The main point of this is that this is another component of this graphic that's shown here, where in this case, we're keying into the interconnection process enhancements to continue in the process that the ISO is working on to tighten the linkages between resource and transmission planning, the procurement that goes on between the load serving entities and in part by the CPUC, and the ISO interconnection process. So the IPE initiative as we move forward is really relying on some of the foundational components of the memorandum of understanding between the CPUC, the CEC, and the ISO. So if we could go to the next slide, thank you. So this slide shows the historical number of interconnection requests that we've received over a fairly long history here, and just shows how things have changed in recent years, where for a number of years, we really hovered around about 100 interconnection requests year over year coming into the ISO and being studied each year. We started to see a bit of an uptick for cluster 12 and 13, but then we saw a dramatic increase for cluster 14 in 2021, where we received more interconnection requests than we'd ever received in the past. And then coming into cluster 15, we even far surpassed that number, going nearly double what we had actually expected to receive based on an informal survey that we had performed late last year. So it really helps to, shows that this reinforces the need for transformational changes within the interconnection process. The way the process was designed and worked successfully for many years no longer works when we have this number of interconnection projects coming into the process. And part of the reason we're seeing so many is because of the procurement orders that are coming out of the PUC and the portfolios that they give to us for our transmission planning process that show roughly 7,000 megawatts of new generation that are needed year over year to meet the state goals. So we just see a lot of projects, a lot of developers coming with many projects, new developers coming to the scene. Many of those projects are seeking to interconnect in areas where we aren't planning new transmission for. So we need to work on that to provide the proper signals to developers. And many of the projects are actually seeking to interconnect in areas where we are seeking to expand the transmission system. But the number of requests and the amount of capacity in those areas far exceed the volume of excess capacity that we have to actually give to those projects. So if we could move to the next slide. So these are the main components of what we're proposing in the tariff changes today, where the first component is we're postponing the processing of cluster 15 interconnection requests, where we've received a request, we've determined that they are complete and they're ready to move to the next stage that we would typically move into validation. But we are at this point putting a pause on validation as well as holding the scoping meetings and the studies until the second quarter of 2024. And that will allow us to complete the cluster 14 studies in a timely manner, and knowing that we have a record number of projects that are in a phase 2 study. And it'll also allow us to continue to work on track 2 of the IPE initiative to put into place the new transformational changes that we're looking to do in order to study this record number of projects that we have in cluster 15, or at least get them down to a number that are truly targeted to what the portfolio and the transmission plan can provide for projects. The second component is, part of this is that we just want to make sure that you're aware that we are not going to be accepting independent study process interconnection requests until the cluster 15 has received all of its phase 1 study results. Now, this is totally in line with the current tariff. The only thing that's a bit of a tweak to that tariff is that we're just not going to accept those interconnection requests in the period between now and when the cluster 15 study results come out for phase 1. According to the tariff, we cannot actually determine and do the tests required to determine if a project is truly independent from the cluster study process until we get those cluster 15 projects fully studied in phase 1. So it's really not impacting the projects that really would like to consider the independent study process, but it does work to prevent a rush of interconnection requests that would result in a separate independent study queue that would be formed within the ISO studies as we wait for cluster 15 results. And then the last item is we're revising the cluster 14 phase 2 study report deadline from November 24 of 2023 to January 31 of 2024. This, we feel, is appropriate to handle the record number of interconnection requests that is going into phase 2. This will provide an appropriate amount of time to finish the studies rather than rely on a schedule that was assumed to be much smaller or assumed to be based on a smaller number of projects that would be studied in phase 2. So with that, I'll open it up to questions, and management does recommend that the board approve the proposed Track 1 generator interconnection changes.
Questions from the board?
I'm just wondering, I mean, we seem to be having a strategy of mostly delaying the existing process in order to get through basically studying all of the projects and the myriad of projects we've received in cluster 14 and cluster 15. What are we doing to expedite the review projects, the review of the individual projects? Because it seems to me that the delay is okay, but are there any initiatives for expediting the review as well? Because you probably need to double and triple the review processes if we're getting so many projects. And then if we're delaying bringing in cluster 15, and then who knows when we'll have cluster 16 by the time the phase 1 study results come out. Are we going to be able, and I know we have a lot of projects pending, but realistically where projects can interconnect, are we going to be able to meet that 6,000, 7,000 megawatts interconnection we need to be working towards in an expedited fashion?
It's Neil here. I'll provide some opening comments on that and then see if Bob wants to add that. Just to put things in perspective, the cluster 14 schedule change, which we portrayed as a modest schedule change, actually keeps the current allocation timeline on track for the cluster 14 detailed results, so that those projects could move through then into the contracting process. To put some numbers around it, our current queue, including cluster 14, has about 180,000 megawatts of resources. 100,000, just under 100,000 of that is in cluster 14 moving into phase 2. So there's a fairly large number of projects representing over 80,000 megawatts of installed capacity that are in our queue and in various stages of contracting. So there's a lot in the queue for load serving entities right now to choose from. And by, as we move into 2024, we will also be making available then the cluster 14 results. We do see that we do need to fix this. This is not an acceptable outcome of constantly having to defer study cycles. And last year, when we went through our interconnection process enhancements, there was some speculation that I think the team made a number of great incremental improvements, but it was incremental. It wasn't transformative.
I know.
There was some industry speculation that cluster 14 was an anomaly and that we would actually be dropping back to more conventional historical levels of applications. And we were concerned about that. And based on our survey last year, we pressed forward setting the stage for this next round. But that's just really gotten us to this point. We do need to make these broader transformational changes, because even if we had all the resources to study 350,000 megawatts of resources in cluster 15, the results would not be meaningful with that level of oversupply. The results in any given area would be excessive and produce unrealistic timeframes. Bob didn't mention it, but in one substation alone, we received 18,000 megawatts of interconnection requests. So we have to corral the numbers. We have to get to focusing on reasonable volumes in the priority areas so that we're not facing this kind of schedule delay. And like I said, simply throwing more staffing at it to crank out the results still wouldn't actually help us provide meaningful results that the people responsible for procurement could then act on and winnow down from that volume of overheated competition to the number of projects that actually need to get built and move forward in the compressed timelines that we now need to maintain building 7,000 megawatts of new capacity a year. So we do appreciate that the schedule change here is unfortunate. We cannot have this be the new way of going forward every year asking for another delay. But what we see is needing to fix the process overall and getting the time to put these transformative changes in place. And to be frank, last year when we were dealing with the Cluster 14 issue, I don't think industry as a whole was necessarily on the same page that bigger changes would be needed. And we respected that. And this year we're seeing broad support for the need to make changes. The devil will be in the, yeah.
You do have to make the changes because, I
Yes.
mean, an interconnection request of 18,000 megawatts on one substation is unsustainable. You're right. Or an interconnection or project development request where there's no opportunity to interconnect in the foreseeable future also is a non-starter. And that should probably be communicated to projects quickly. Just another very quick question. Out of all the applications that we usually receive, because we do receive a lot more than we need, what's the percentage that actually gets through to being implemented and constructed?
Well,
Is
up
that still
until
hovering around 8%?
up until 2 years ago, I would have said it was around 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7. Now that number, even with needing 7,000 megawatts of new connection, that number is skyrocketing, probably 1 out of 20.
Yeah.
But it's
Okay.
not. But it's not because we're not getting projects connected that we need. You know, over the last in each of the last 2 years, we averaged, or over the last 2 years, we've been averaging adding about 4,000 megawatts of new installed capacity a year. This year, we may break 8,000 megawatts of new installed capacity in a year. So these numbers are achievable, but our processes need to be tightened up to sustain that pace over the next decade and to accommodate the increased amount of competition. But more competition doesn't mean more projects are needed. And that's where we need to sharpen the pencils, get the focus through the integrated approach of the resource planning, transmission planning, interconnection, and procurement to home in more quickly on which projects will be getting built and making sure that we get them connected and have the transmission to support them.
Exactly, and to a certain extent cooperate, this goes to the previous item as well, as much as possible with the PUC and other agencies to expedite permitting, because that goes to financing and implementation and schedules and everything else. So yeah, it's a tough one, Neil. Good luck.
All tracks need attention. There's not just one single silver bullet solution. All tracks need attention.
And are we still solar heavy on all the project mostly, or are we seeing a little more diversity in the pool of resources coming in?
By far, batteries are the largest amount. A lot of solar and solar coupled with batteries, and some. We're also seeing the offshore wind starting to show up, and a few other projects. But that's primarily batteries, solar, and now offshore wind and wind projects. Bob, did I miss anything there? I think I captured.
No, I think you captured it well.
Thanks.
Neil, I wanted just to add very briefly before we go to Governor Edo. So Angelina, great question. And I just wanted to put an exclamation point on two things that Neil said, which I think are really important. We are at the CAISO, we're just acutely sensitive to the importance of being able to onboard resources now while we're working through the friction in the interconnection queue, right? We don't have the time to wait for 2 more, 3 more years to be doing it. And the numbers that Neil cited that you'll hear again, if things play out as expected across the course of the summer, by September, the state will have onboarded over 8,000 megawatts of new nameplate capacity between September of 2022 and September of 2023. That's a pretty huge accomplishment, and we're of course aiming to sustain it. So your questions are so relevant, and when we come back to you in December, with the results of the IPE Track 2, I think we're going to come back with, a very transformational package to really address the systemic problem. So, we're still in a transition phase. We don't have immediate solutions to every problem, but taking a slightly longer view, coming back and really saying, these are the changes that are absolutely necessary. And to your point, we need the help downstream on the permitting and siting and the presumption of need for these transmission projects. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Governor Edo?
Yeah, it's very clear to me, and I'm very eager to see what will come back in December. But I do have a couple of questions just about cluster 14, which is my first observation is that you have more than twice the number of projects. Is adding 3 months, 2 months enough time to get through the phase 2 process? That's one part. And then given the volume of projects that are there, what will happen to them as we try to reform the entire process? I mean, you have way more projects in there than can likely be built.
It's Neil, I'll offer a few thoughts on that. First, one of the advantages that helps us meet the cluster 14 timeline is that while Bob and the policy team will be off working on the track 2 broader changes, the planning and engineering time, though, instead of being focused on cluster 14 and cluster 15, is able to pivot to focus on cluster 14. So even setting aside the time required to do the detailed validations of all the requests that have come in, that in itself provides additional staff time to focus on the cluster 14 studies, but it's not a trivial exercise. And we did see needing some adjustment, but this schedule, Jeff and his team had worked out with the utilities that we believe we can achieve this. This allows those projects to post and move forward into contracting and be eligible for and be able to move forward if they receive contracts through the various load serving entities procurement processes. So that really helps meet that immediate need of keeping the projects moving. One of the other areas, excuse me, the other thing I wanted to mention is we've been talking a lot about the process changes we're looking at for future intake, focusing future cluster studies on the areas that have been prioritized through the zonal transmission approach and getting the numbers to better align with procurement interest. The other part of track 2 that is an issue that a number of stakeholders really wanted to make sure we kept our eye on the ball for, and I think this was a key area that the Large Scale Solar Association emphasized in particular, was the need to also pay attention to the projects that are already in the queue, that we don't let projects that are not likely to be successful, that had their day in the sun to offer an opportunity to get contracts and are not successful, that we also pay attention to our processes for encouraging those projects to drop out and allow other projects to move forward. So that is another area we're also wanting to pay attention to in the track 2 effort around managing the queue of projects that are already in the queue, may have already been allocated transmission capacity based on when they applied and got in, but that we do not let unsuccessful projects stay indefinitely and get in the way of the projects that do need to move forward.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful.
So with that, are there any other questions of the Board of Governors at this time? Seeing none, I think, Roger, it's time to take public comment.
Yes, let's do that. And let me also note for the record that we did receive a public comment letter that was provided to the board. This was also from Northern California Power Agency. And there was 2 letters, one particular on the interconnection process enhancements. And so that has been provided. With that, Michelle, I see we have Ed Smeloff again, and I think a couple of, or at least one more that has popped up. So I think Ed would be first in the queue.
All right. Ed, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Greetings again. This is Ed Smeloff representing the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies. We support the process enhancements and process reforms that are in front of you. And we think that your team is on track for a more fundamental transformational process on interconnection. We do think that the zonal focus really is sort of the key to interconnection reform. Developers need to be directed to the areas where you're going to build the transmission, where there's going to be available capacity on the transmission, and not use the interconnection process as a dartboard and put projects all over the field where it's not likely that they'll be developed and where the cost of upgrading the network would be unbearable. So the next phase is really important. You need to begin to think about what are the screening criteria, what is the prioritization process. Of course, all of it needs to be consistent with open access, but you want to encourage developers to go where there's available capacity, and you need to prioritize the study process, the system impact studies, based on those interconnection applications that have been submitted to the zonal focus that you're taking in the transmission process. So encourage you to approve this and to stay focused and push forward on track 2 of this process to get some more fundamental changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Our next speaker.
Yes, next in the queue is Igor Grinberg.
Yes.
Igor, go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board of Governors. My name is Igor Grinberg. I'm a regulatory analyst with PG&E. I just want to start off by saying PG&E appreciates and supports the CAISO staff proposal to adjust the timing of processing the Cluster 15 applications and provide additional time for the completion of Cluster 14 Phase 2 studies. In PG&E's service territory alone, there are 105 projects being studied as part of Cluster 14 Phase 2. This is nearly 5 times the number of projects that proceeded to Phase 2 in the previous Cluster 13, which was more reflective of the norm in prior clusters. We would like to thank Bob Emmert and Jeff Billington for their coordination and collaboration with PG&E and other stakeholders to look at immediate changes necessary to ensure Cluster 14 can be completed efficiently, and also begin examining transformative enhancements to the cluster process to ensure that we plan the system in a productive manner. We look forward to working on Phase 2 with CAISO and other stakeholders. With that, PG&E requests the CAISO board approve the staff recommendation for track 1. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's okay. Multiple thank yous. And Michelle, is there anyone else on the queue or on the line?
There are no additional raised hands in queue at this time.
Excellent, thank you. And with that, Mary, I think I turn it back to you if there's anything further you would like to say, or we can move to a motion.
I want to check with my colleagues on the Board of Governors. Anyone have a final comment? No one has a final comment? Great. Then we will advance to the reading of the motion and taking a vote.
Excellent, thank you. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the proposed Track 1 interconnection process enhancements as described in the memorandum dated May 10, 2023, and move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
And I really look forward to the transformational update changes for December.
Thank you, Governor Galitova, and I heard Governor Borenstein with a second. And Governor Borenstein, your vote, please.
Sorry, I had muted myself again. Aye.
And Governor Edo, your vote?
Aye.
Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Chair Leslie?
Aye.
Vice Chair Shorey?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, governors. The motion passes.
Fabulous.
All right. Congratulations, Neil, on your second success of today, the interconnection process enhancement. Now we're on to item 7, the briefing on summer loads and resource assessment. Neil, it is also our privilege to hear from you today on that. Neil Millar, VP of Infrastructure and Operations, unless this is not correct. Go ahead.
This is correct. This is correct. And to soften the blow, I also brought along someone who's far more interesting who will present part of this to talk about the forecasting and the weather situation we're facing that is also going to be a pretty critical part of summer preparedness. So I'll walk through some preliminary slides to set the stage. If I could move to the next slide, please. So as Elliot had already indicated, this year we are walking into the summer showing considerable improvement in overall conditions compared to past years. Two main drivers for that, of course, the new resources that have been coming online since last September, and the improved hydro conditions. And just to put a finer point on this, this table shows as of beginning of April, when we were starting our analysis work, the targeted resources working their way through our new resource interconnection process, targeting coming online by June 1st, and then the numbers targeting coming online by September 1st. We did know there would be slippage in schedule. As generators are working through the processes, they do take hits on their on everything from development to permitting. So we knew there would be some slippage. So we did look at the results both ways. What are the resources that we're planning on seeing by June, as well as that we're currently on schedule at the time for September? Since this table was prepared, we've seen some slippage in numbers from those targeting June 1st into July and August. But actually, the big picture for people targeting September 1st, that's still holding relatively solid. So like I said, people targeting the beginning of summer were a bit optimistic, but we're still looking pretty good on the September numbers at this point. Now, the hydro conditions, of course, everyone's heard a great deal about the winter snowpack, but as of April 6th, we were looking at over 240% of average conditions. So that's put us in really good shape going into the year. Those resources, if I could just look at the next slide, please. Those resources more than offset the impact of some modest load growth. This table, we just provided the Energy Commission's forecast for this summer, looking at 1 in 2, 1 in 5, and 1 in 10 weather events. And across all three spectrum, we were seeing roughly a 500 megawatt forecast increase compared to last year's forecast. I do have to remind people, of course, in 2022, where the demand hit 52,000 megawatts, that equated to more than a 1 in 25 year event based on historical weather data. Next slide, please. Now, what we've been doing to focus how we're tracking is assessing how the resource development and the hydro conditions have been impacting how we compare against our long-term planning targets of meeting a 1 in 10 loss of load expectation. Are the resources coming on as designed to meet that plan? And when we look at the resources, given our current high hydro conditions, considering the resources that we're targeting by June 1st alone, that already showed a modest surplus of meeting a 1 in 10 goal. And when we look at the resources that are expected online by September 1st, that shows a much more significant surplus in meeting that planning target. Now, to put that in perspective, we were going into the summer of 2022 using the same type of analysis, showing a 1,700 megawatt capacity shortfall. So that shows the progress that we're making and why we're showing this cautious optimism going into this summer. Now, with average hydro conditions, the situation would be more narrow, where depending on the resources, we would be bracketing that planning target. So it's for us, the combined effect of new resource additions and hydro are really helping our position going into the summer. The other way we look at this, besides looking at the probabilistic analysis, has been to also do a bit more of a brute force effect and simply add up the resources that are available at 8 p.m. and stack up how those resources compare against the peak load that we would expect to experience at 8 p.m. in September. And that's what these bar charts are showing is solar's left out because we're looking at that 8 p.m. critical hour and just adding up the resources, simple math. And what this graph also shows is that to meet our peak load plus a reasonable reserve margin that would allow us to meet our operating reserves, we're showing again significant improvement. And whereas last year, to maintain that reserve margin necessary from an operational perspective, we saw dipping not just into average RA import levels, but going a bit beyond. This year, we show that even with only a 75% of the average RA imports, the rest of the resources combined would allow us to meet that reserve margin. So this is a bit more of a brute force operational assessment as opposed to the more complex probabilistic analysis, but it's a belt and suspenders way to look at our conditions going into the summer. So it's important to us that we see trends in both. Now I'd like to turn it over to Amber Motley, our Senior Manager of Short-Term Forecasting, who will walk through some of the environmental conditions. Amber?
Thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, board members. So to dive into a little bit about what the conditions are, as well as what we're looking at on the forecast side as it relates to temperature forecast for the summer season and into early fall. Like Neil mentioned, we had a good snowpack year. That snowpack year was really concentrated with California. You saw the California specific graph and as well into the western southern part of the WEIM footprint. So the dark blue colors indicate when you see percentages, this is as of March of 2023, above the 150 percentile for this time of the year. So when you see that really dark blue color, that's showing you have a really healthy snowpack out there. You know, for an example, there's about 100 inches of snow still left in the Sierra right now to be melted over time and then flow down into the streams and also into the soil. The colors, when you zoom into, you know, the more green period up into the far Pacific Northwest, as well as in the yellow, you do see that they received some snow, but they did not receive as much snow as the farther southern part of the western footprint. So those yellow colors are 70 to 80% of normal. Green is 90 to like 120% of normal. So just keep in mind that they do have some up there, but not quite as much as you have down in the southern part of the footprint. With that being said, this snow will melt over time, depending what the temperatures look like. We went through a really good heat spell for the Pacific Northwest as well as California the last week. That will increase the snow melt from melting and moving down into the reservoirs, into the soil. So you look over to the right graph, and that really shows you the reservoir capability across the West. So each size dot represents how big that reservoir is in the capacity of water that it can hold. And then each color indicates where they are in comparison to normal. So similar to the other side of the graph, less than 50% of normal is indicated in red, 50% to 75% is indicated in yellow, and 75% and above of the capacity is indicated in green. So though we have a really healthy snowpack, there's still some room where those reservoirs really need to fill up, specifically throughout the western, the Pacific Northwest area. Some of the areas we saw the heavier drought, multi-year drought coming through. With that, I'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit about temperature. So what does the temperature look like? We break the temperature forecast into two different months that we're looking at. One period of time is June, July, and August. And this map shows you the probability of the temperature getting to be above normal. This is average temperature of the day, not max temperature. So it's telling you that the average temperature probability to be above normal throughout the whole western footprint is above, you know, they have a probability to do that. The areas where you see more increased probability are the far Pacific Northwest, as well as Northern California. This is a indicator that you see as we're transitioning from a La Nina to an El Nino, which is where you look at the sea surface temperatures over the Pacific Ocean, and all those sea surface temperatures are changing over time. You also see in the far Four Corners region that there's a higher probability of above normal temperatures for the New Mexico area in the months of June, July, and August. One of the things that we're watching very closely across the full coast is the sea surface temperatures. Right now, the sea surface temperatures across the close part of the west on the coastal range are well below normal. Those are expected to become above normal towards the end of the season, August, September timeframe. But right now they're below normal, allowing that coastal area to have a little bit more air conditioning for this early season, which would help them stay not as much above normal as we're going to see in the next slide in the later summer. Next slide. This is looking at August, September, and October of 2023. And it is, so you're shifting 1 month. You're taking essentially June out of the, June and July out of the mix when you're looking at August, September, and October. So the reason we look at this is we've seen a lot of late season heat. That is also what we saw last year. We expect the sea surface temperatures to move to warm across the coast. And with that, we see the probability of temperatures being above normal grow. So you have a higher probability, the darker the orange color, the higher the probability to be above normal in the seasons of August, September, and October. That is still focused in the Pacific Northwest, as well as Northern California, made its way down into the Central California area, as well as, you know, some of that far western Four Corner region, where you also see the probability increase for Southern California and the coastal areas. A lot of this is driven from the warming sea surface temperatures, as well as where the expected placement of what we call an atmospheric ridge is going to set up, really allowing some of those more west-wide heat ups in the later part of the season. So with that, that's the overall forecast as we head into the summer for this year. The big takeaways is we do have a strong hydro pack, hydro snowpack waiting to be melted. It's much better in the California and the more central western part. The Pacific Northwest also has water to be moved down into the reservoirs, and we'll start seeing that in the coming weeks as the temperatures warm. And with that, we are expecting late season heat. We'll still have some heat ups in this period of time. We are expected to have probability to be above normal, but the higher chances of the probability to be above normal are in the later season, in that August and September timeframe, when we see the warming sea surface temperatures. And with that, I will pass it back.
Okay, thanks, Amber. And so just to kind of summarize the key observations through this, overall, as we said, the 2023 conditions have improved significantly for both of those reasons. Even tracking some slippage, we are expecting over 3,000 megawatts of storage supply compared to last September, as well as these beneficial hydro conditions. We're always cautiously optimistic because we do have the concern of remaining vulnerable to high loads and availability of imports during widespread heat events, especially in the late summer. That is our critical time, of course. And the hours of most vulnerability, besides seeing an overall reduction in our exposure, the hours of risk continue to shift out after when the solar output has dropped off. That's our window, also where the storage makes a valuable contribution, but that is where our vulnerability largely rests. And of course, regarding the extreme events that have become a bit all too common over the last few years, the preparedness to access strategic reserves has been continuing to be refined, and we're continuing to work with the state agencies around their availability so that we can safeguard against the extreme events. So I'll wrap up there and see if you have any questions for Amber.
Well,
no, as always, great job, Amber. Thank you so much. It's good to see the update and very heartwarming to hear that we're looking better this year. And hopefully we don't get into peak heat conditions later in the summer.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment as well and just say, but what I do see is that we still have a bit of a wild card regarding higher temperatures in August, September. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions for Neil or Amber? If not, we'll open it to public comment. Roger?
Yes, please. Michelle, if there are any public commenters in the queue, or if you could have them queue up, please.
All right, once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to make a comment, please press the raise hand icon on the screen of your Zoom platform. If you are joined today via telephone, please press #2 to enter the comment queue. Okay, I do not see any raised hands in queue.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Chair Leslie, back to you. I think it's time to move to the next item, unless you have anything further on this one.
No, I think next item is a decisional item regarding our committee memberships. And Roger, you're going to be introducing that topic to us.
Yes. As everyone knows, we have welcomed Joe Edo on our board today, and it's my understanding that the board wanted to have a conversation as to potential committee memberships for Mr. Edo. And so I turn it to you and the rest of the board for any discussion regarding that matter.
Is it a discussion or a vote?
Well, it's not a vote until someone makes a recommendation as to what would be an appropriate committee for Joe.
Well, I think that's up to Governor Edo, but this is like a beauty contest. You have now attended both meetings, Governor. Do you have a preference to start?
I'm very interested in both committees, but given my newness to the board, I feel like starting with the audit committee would be the most appropriate place to begin in terms of getting a much deeper and broader view of all the things the ISO does. Severin and Jan have assured me that I am welcome to sit in on DMM committee meetings because I do have an active interest in that area as well, but I'll probably participate more as an observer rather than as a member.
Terrific. Then Governor Galiteva, would you like, as chair, would you like to do the official nominating?
Yes, absolutely. It's my pleasure to nominate our newest member of the governing board, Joe Ito, to the audit committee.
Second.
That was too fast.
I'm not excited to have
Now let me make that official before you all start voting. So why don't we move that the ISO Board of Governors elects Joe Edo to serve as a member of the Audit Committee effective May 18, 2023, which would mean the Audit Committee will now consist of Joe Edo, Mary Leslie, and the current chair, Angelina Galiteva.
So
now, there's a first, and do we have a second?
Second.
Governor Borenstein, thank you. And your vote, Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Edo, here's your chance. Here's your vote.
I better vote aye.
See, you're showing a man of great judgment. And Governor Galiteva?
Aye.
Chair Leslie?
Aye.
And Vice Chair Shori?
Aye.
Thank you. This is the easiest item all day, and the motion passes. And with that, we are left with only our informational reports, which are for reference, and if there happen to be any questions by any of the governors.
Seeing none, Roger, this means we can thank everyone for 2 full days of successful decision-making. Look forward to seeing each other again in July.
Excellent.
Fabulous. Thank you all so much.
We can adjourn.
Ellie, do you want some final words?
No, Chair Leslie and the governors, I think it's all been said today. Just a big thanks. Really appreciate it. All the best to you.
And thank you for the informational reports. They were very good, as always.
Yes, they were.
Take care.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
This concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.